A recently released report by Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council member and economist Shamika Ravi has thrown up interesting highlights on state budget trends. The report highlights some encouraging as well as troubling aspects of state budget over the course of last 30 years. For example, interest payment has been consistently high and much above all state averages for the state of Kerala, West Bengal and Punjab. The development expenditure of states and in comparison to their non-development expenditure is least in Kerala and Punjab. The good news, however, is the share of development expenditure remains more than 50% for all large states, except of course, as I mentioned, for Punjab and Kerala. It is a good mix of the data points coming in by the way of that report. Joining us on the show is Vivek Kumar, economist at QuantEco. Vivek, thank you very much for taking time out. What are the big highlights of that story?
Yeah, sure. So the highlights are plenty. It's a timely report because the budget season is almost upon us. And although it is not about the central government, it is about state government. But nevertheless, I guess it's a good wake-up call because there are important issues highlighted. One is the composition of the revenues among states. So which state is more dependent upon its own revenue? Typically, you see states which are doing good in terms of growth performance. Their dependence on central grant for their total revenue collection is relatively lower, which is a good sign, which tells you that these the important states which are generating more growth on their own, their reliance is lesser on the central grant. The second aspect which I found interesting was the divide between development expenditure and capital expenditure. Typically, states which are doing good in terms of, I mean, you would expect that also to happen because states which are doing good on revenue collection have more wherewithal to spend on both development expenditure as well as the capital side of disbursement. Now, it's an individual state's call whether to divert expenditure between development expenditure or capital expenditure. I guess at the end of the day, both are development oriented in nature. It's just the color of the development that one has to choose depending upon what is the point of origin, what is the political climate, what is the need for the citizens of that particular state. So the needs and political climate depends and varies from one state to another. And I think last but not the least is that it definitely does touch upon the fact that it would be by and large detrimental for states to revive the old pension scheme if they were to choose to do so. So this is detrimental from a fiscal health perspective, not detrimental from, let's say, from the benefits that it would accrue to some of the citizens. But from a fiscal health perspective, I think it's clearly showing that this is a strategy which is not sustainable in the longer run.
Hi Vivek, Kartik here. Thanks for joining us today. Good to see you after a while. Yesterday we had a chance to speak to the former finance minister of Kerala, and this was Mr. Isaac Thomas. He was on our show yesterday evening, and his observation was, and this is something I want to throw off you and get your perspective, his observation was that while this trend historically over the last 30 years has shown that in the state of Kerala, the debt has been much higher than many other states, he's saying that it is actually not unsustainable and quite likely to reverse because there is money going back into the state's development. However, there doesn't seem to be much action taken on the ground. Now, in the case of Kerala and in the case of West Bengal, we have obviously seen that these have been states which have largely been led by communist parties in the past, and there hasn't been much industrialization. But what do you make specifically of a state like Punjab, which again might not have been as industrial, though there are pockets of industrialization in Punjab when it comes to Jalandhar, Ludhiana, etc., but largely been an agrarian state. So going forward, what is the potential for these states to actually reverse this trend?
I think the best strategy for them would be to rev up growth, and that will to some extent take into consideration what kind of revenue consideration that these particular states you're talking about, whether it is Kerala, whether it is Punjab, or whether it is any other state. But primarily, I think the answer to if you have to get out of the debt trap, I think growth is the foremost option that you have as a policymaker. The second is obviously inflation. So if you can generate inflation in a certain moderate way, so I'm not saying that you start. I'm not propagating that you should start aiming for a very high inflation because then it will have a detrimental impact on your fiscal health as such, but a moderately high inflation. So let's say if the country is targeting 2 to 6% inflation band, then if the particular state can have inflation in the upper end of the inflation targeting band, which by and large would still remain within the target band for the center, would help generate a little bit of cushion from a debt sustainability perspective. So
Okay.
first would be growth. Second would be slightly higher amount of inflation vis-a-vis the national average. And last but not the least would be to avoid any sort of recklessness as far as the fiscal health is concerned.
So I think the allegations, Shweta, in the social media and generally people that we are speaking to has also been that states which have taken a higher debt from the central government, it's not just the fact that they end up paying more interest to the central government, but it's also the fact that this money taken has actually not gone into industrialization, rather it has gone into distribution of freebies for the large section of the population within the state. The other side of the story also is that these states have actually not been industrial in nature, and hence their own development is going to take much longer, and that length of development will only come by way of continuity in the state government, and that continuity will come only if you give the SOP. So I think this dichotomy is something which sort of becomes a checkmate situation, and states are unable to get out of.
You know, very interestingly, as Vivek pointed out, growth in itself is a parameter on the basis of which you can judge a development of a state. So when you talk about a state like Kerala, even where non-development expenditure is far higher as compared to other states, a growth rate consistently of 6.3% over the course of last 10 years in itself speaks about kind of policies that the government is rolling. It is an indicator perhaps of the economic growth and progress, even though the state is not industrial in nature,
So
for that
to
matter.
to my limited understanding of this, Shweta, and I think Vivek would be able to answer this better, but I feel Kerala also being a state which has a large population of foreign remittances coming into the state, especially from the Gulf, especially from oil producing nations, especially from countries where the demand for nursing is much higher.
Fair enough.
Could be
Yes.
one of the key contributors to the state GDP in the overall GDP formula. I think this foreign revenue coming into, or forex coming into the state, could be one of the key factors for Kerala outshining. But
Okay,
for
but
a
when
state
you
like
compare,
Punjab,
for example, a West Bengal with a UP, a West Bengal growing at an average rate of 4.4%, more than UP growing at an average rate of 4.1%, what does it tell you? It tells you that even though the state is not pushing for industrialization, it is anti-capitalist, socialist in a way, as you pointed out. The development rate is still far higher. I mean, I think we would like...
Absolutely. And add to that Punjab, which is pretty much the wheat basket of India and has its own little townships and its own clusters of SMEs, is still growing only at about 4.2%. So I think interesting dichotomy in this data.
All right. Vivek, you know, I want to pick your brains, of course, on the fact that Shamika Ravi in her tweet has also highlighted why it's a growing concern that the non-development expenditure of some of these states is less than 50% of the total state's expenditure. Are you concerned with that indicator?
Well, for some states, yes, it is a concern, but states put together, I think, as far as the non-development expenditure is concerned, states put together as doing good. So if I have to take a, let's say, a slide view of how the central fisc is looking and how the cumulative state fisc is looking, then in most of the parameters, I guess the cumulative state fisc is doing better than the central fisc. Now, here there is a dichotomy because the cumulative state fisc has a lot of divergence between the good states and the bad states. So, for example, Kerala you pointed out earlier, and Punjab you also pointed out as being two states. So Kerala stands out as being one of the states which probably has the higher growth rate vis-a-vis the national average across 2 decades. So we are comparing, I think essentially the study looks at a 2-decade period. And in the last 2 decades, Kerala has outperformed the national average, whereas Punjab has not. So one observation for me which kind of stands out in this case is that states which have high dominance of services will tend to outperform in this period because 2000 to 2019, we're looking at this 2-decade period, was a period for boom in case of services growth in India. This was the period when the IT sector took off. IT sector took off in late 90s, but the fruits started to bear in the 2000s. And 2002 I mean, thereafter 2010, you also had the sector of the telephone and the mobile sector taking off in a big way. So services sector dominated the national landscape and the economic landscape, and states which have this dominance will tend to outperform states which have a more traditional industrial dominance. So Punjab would be much more industrialized than Kerala. It is doing badly vis-a-vis growth rate, vis-a-vis, I guess, overall fiscal state is concerned. Similarly, I think if you look at some of the other states like, West Bengal also traditionally has been an industrial state. Also, there has, of late, West Bengal has suffered more on the deindustrialization front rather than the industrialization front. But traditionally, West Bengal has been one of the more industrialized states in India. So there also you'll see growth rate being lower and the pressure on fisc also being lower. So, or pressure on fisc, sorry, on the contrary, being on the higher side. So for me, I think I would also look at it from this perspective as to what kind of business cycle are we looking at, because this was the period in which the business cycle was completely different than the business cycle that existed in 1980s or 1990s.
All
So
right.
yes, and as we move forward, I guess in the immediate term, if we are looking at the next 3 to 5 years, the dominance of service sector is likely to continue. Now, if you have to take a very long term, so let's take a 20-year term, then probably you could start arguing that with the focus on industrialization, on manufacturing policy, focus on PLIs, focused on national infrastructure policy, there would be states which traditionally are more industrial in nature and they would probably tend to gain more. So you could again have winners and losers in the short term as well as long term, which could be completely different from each other.
All right, and before I let you go, I think to break down all the complex graphs that we are seeing on our screens, if you could name 5 states that are doing extremely well and 5 states that really need to buck up come financial year 2025, which of these states would be?
I think it's probably not very difficult, but for me, I think the poster boys would be Gujarat, Maharashtra, to some extent Telangana, and Karnataka. I think I've named 5.
Tamil Nadu?
And Tamil Nadu, yes.
Okay.
So Delhi is also not doing badly as far as fisc is concerned. So Delhi
Okay.
also would probably make that cut. The laggards would be the traditional ones like Bihar, Jharkhand, UP to some extent, Assam. So basically, more dominance towards the east is where you'll find the laggards, and the outperformers you'll have a little bit of pocket exists in north, whereas a dominant pocket exists in case of west and south. So if I can give you that color, I think you'll get your answer.
All right, and with Punjab and Kerala are very interesting outliers in a way, but also don't find them mentioned either in developing, least developed or developed states for that matter. Vivek Kumar, thank you very much, sir, for bringing all those details. Thank you for joining us here on News 9.